On June 15, 2019, at 7:43 in the morning, the police department of Greenville, South Carolina, received a call from a local resident who was out for his morning run in Falls Park. The man reported that he had discovered a woman's body lying on the grass near a walking path. Police officers arriving at the scene found the body of a young woman, appearing to be between 25 and 30 years old, with signs of violent death. The body was partially unclothed, immediately raising suspicions of a sexual nature to the crime. Detectives from the Homicide Division, upon arriving at the crime scene, conducted an initial examination. It was determined that death had occurred due to strangulation. Characteristic marks from the attacker's hands were found on the victim's neck. Additionally, there were multiple bruises and abrasions on the body, indicating a struggle before death. Forensic specialists carefully examined the crime scene, collecting all possible evidence. Footprints, cigarette butts, and several long hairs, presumably not belonging to the victim, were discovered. All found items were properly packaged and sent to the laboratory for further analysis. The police cordoned off the park area to prevent the destruction of potential evidence. Witnesses who were in the park that morning were interviewed, but no one could provide any useful information about the incident or suspicious individuals. No documents were found at the crime scene that could help identify the deceased. The victim's fingerprints were taken for database verification. Photographs of the face and distinguishing features were also taken for possible identification. Greenville Police Chief Ken Miller made a brief statement to the press, confirming the discovery of the body and the start of the investigation. He urged city residents with any information about the incident or the identity of the deceased to contact the police. The victim's body was sent to the morgue for a forensic examination, which was to determine the exact time and cause of death, as well as collect additional evidence that might have remained on the body. Within 24 hours of the body's discovery, the police managed to establish the victim's identity. She turned out to be Melissa Thompson, 28 years old, who worked as a nurse at a local Greenville hospital. The identification was made after Melissa's colleagues reported her absence from work and saw the deceased's photo in the news. Detectives immediately began gathering information about Melissa Thompson's life. It was established that she was unmarried and lived alone in an apartment not far from the crime scene. Colleagues described her as a responsible and friendly employee who had no apparent conflicts or problems. An examination of Melissa's apartment revealed no signs of forced entry or struggle. Detectives discovered that the victim's mobile phone was missing from her home, which could have contained important information for the investigation. A procedure to track the phone through the cellular provider was initiated. Analysis of Melissa's financial transactions showed that on the evening before the murder, she had visited a local bar called Joe's, located a few blocks from her home. The bar owner confirmed that Melissa was there from about 9 p.m. to 11:30 p.m., and left the establishment alone. The forensic medical examination established the time of death between 1 a.m. and 3 a.m. Traces of sexual contact that had occurred shortly before death were also found. Skin particles, presumably from the attacker, were found under the victim's fingernails and were sent for DNA analysis. The police began interviewing Melissa's acquaintances and relatives. Her parents, living in a neighboring state, reported that their daughter had recently mentioned a new man in her life but didn't go into details. This information drew special attention from investigators. Analysis of surveillance camera footage in the Falls Park area revealed several suspicious individuals present there on the night of the murder. However, due to the low quality of the recordings and darkness, it was not possible to identify anyone. Detectives also studied the history of calls and messages from Melissa's phone over the past few weeks. Several calls from an unknown number were discovered, which was later found to be registered to a military base located 50 miles from Greenville. This finding led the investigation to a new turn. There was a suspicion that the killer might be connected to the military. Detectives began cooperating with military police to obtain additional information about the phone number's owner. By the end of the first week of the investigation, the police had several versions of what happened, but none of them had sufficient evidence. The public in Greenville was alarmed by the incident, and pressure on the police to solve the crime quickly was increasing day by day. On the 10th day of the investigation, there was a breakthrough. DNA analysis obtained from under Melissa Thompson's fingernails matched a record in the military personnel database. The suspect turned out to be Sergeant James Rodriguez, 32 years old, serving at Fort Jackson Military Base. Detectives immediately contacted the military police to obtain additional information about Sergeant Rodriguez. It was revealed that he had been serving in the Army for 10 years and had an impeccable record. Rodriguez was married, had 2 children, and lived in family housing on the base. A check of Rodriguez's alibi showed that on the night of the murder, he was absent from his unit, explaining it as family circumstances. His wife confirmed that her husband returned home only in the early morning, saying he had been delayed at a friend's place. Detectives established that the phone number from which calls were made to Melissa indeed belonged to Rodriguez. During questioning, the sergeant admitted that he knew the deceased but claimed that their relationship was purely friendly. Further investigation revealed that Rodriguez and Thompson had met about 3 months ago at a charity event for veterans, where Melissa worked as a volunteer. Since then, they had been in periodic contact, but the sergeant insisted that he had never met her alone. However, analysis of Rodriguez's phone geolocation data showed that on the night of the murder, he was in the immediate vicinity of Falls Park. When detectives presented him with this data, the sergeant changed his testimony, admitting that he had met with Melissa that night but claimed that they parted around midnight, after which she went home by taxi. A check of taxi company records did not confirm Rodriguez's version. Moreover, during a search of his personal belongings, Melissa's mobile phone was found, which the sergeant allegedly found and was going to return. During interrogation, Rodriguez confessed to an intimate relationship with Melissa but categorically denied involvement in her murder. He claimed that they did indeed meet in the park for a date, but after sexual contact, he left, leaving Melissa alive and unharmed. Despite the denial of guilt, the combination of evidence was sufficient to charge James Rodriguez with the murder of Melissa Thompson. The sergeant was arrested and detained pending trial. The news of a serviceman's arrest on murder charges caused wide public resonance. The command of Fort Jackson Base issued a statement expressing shock at what had happened and assuring full cooperation with the investigation. After James Rodriguez's arrest, investigators delved into studying his past, seeking to find possible motives for the crime or signs of a propensity for violence. Detectives thoroughly analyzed his military career, personal life, and social connections. Rodriguez enlisted in the military right after finishing high school. His service record included 2 deployments to combat zones, Afghanistan and Iraq. During his service, he received several awards for bravery and excellent performance of his duties. Colleagues described Rodriguez as a disciplined and reliable fellow soldier. However, upon deeper examination of his personal file, 2 episodes were discovered that caught the investigators' interest. The first incident occurred during service in Afghanistan, where Rodriguez was subjected to disciplinary action for exceeding authority during prisoner interrogation. The second incident took place at Fort Jackson, where the sergeant received a reprimand for aggressive behavior during training exercises. Psychological tests that Rodriguez regularly underwent as a serviceman did not reveal serious deviations. However, the last examination, conducted a month before the murder, showed elevated stress levels and signs of post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. Investigation into Rodriguez's personal life revealed strained relations with his wife. Neighbors in the military town spoke of frequent arguments in the sergeant's family. Rodriguez's wife, in a confidential conversation with detectives, admitted that in recent months her husband had become more irritable and withdrawn, often leaving home without explanation. Investigators also discovered that 6 months before the murder, Rodriguez had started attending a support group for veterans with PTSD. At these meetings, he met several volunteer nurses, including Melissa Thompson. A check of Rodriguez's financial documents revealed several large cash withdrawals in the week before the murder. The sergeant explained this as the need to pay off debts, but could not provide supporting documents. Detectives also studied Rodriguez's social circle outside the military base. It turned out that he frequently visited a gym in Greenville, where he met a group of local residents. Some of them described the sergeant as a charismatic and sociable person but noted his tendency for sharp mood swings. Analysis of the browser history on Rodriguez's personal computer showed frequent queries related to topics of violence and murders. However, the defense insisted that these searches were related to preparation for military exercises. By the end of the investigation, law enforcement had formed a picture of James Rodriguez's personality as a man with an ambiguous past, potentially suffering from the consequences of participation in combat operations. This information was to play an important role in the upcoming trial, both for the prosecution and the defense. As the trial approached, the investigative team focused on strengthening the evidence base against Sergeant James Rodriguez. The prosecution understood that irrefutable evidence linking the suspect to the place and time of the crime would be required for a successful conviction. A key element of the prosecution became the results of DNA testing. In addition to samples found under the victim's nails, experts discovered Rodriguez's DNA on Melissa Thompson's clothing. Moreover, fibers matching the uniform worn by the sergeant were found at the crime scene. Forensic experts conducted a thorough analysis of footprints discovered in Falls Park. They matched the size and model of boots worn by Rodriguez. During a search of his home, a pair of shoes with traces of dirt was found, the composition of which matched the soil in the park. Digital data analysis played an important role in the investigation. Specialists recovered deleted messages from Melissa's phone found in Rodriguez's possession. The correspondence indicated tense relations between them in the days leading up to the murder. In one of the messages, Melissa threatened to reveal their relationship to the sergeant's wife. Geolocation data from Rodriguez's phone confirmed his presence in the park on the night of the murder. Additionally, traffic camera analysis captured a car similar to the sergeant's vehicle heading towards the park and leaving the area at the critical time. Investigators also found a witness, a homeless person who often slept in the park. He described a man resembling Rodriguez quickly leaving the park early in the morning on the day the body was discovered. Although the reliability of the homeless person's testimony was questionable, it added weight to the prosecution. Toxicology experts found traces of alcohol and mild sedatives in the victim's blood. Similar drugs were found in Rodriguez's home, allowing for the theory of possible deliberate intoxication of the victim before the murder. Ballistic examination revealed that the injuries on Melissa's body could have been inflicted by an army knife similar to the one in Rodriguez's personal use. However, the murder weapon itself was not found. The prosecution also gathered evidence pointing to a possible motive for the crime. Financial documents showed that Rodriguez had significant debts, and search queries about insurance payouts in case of a spouse's death were found on his computer. Despite the solid evidence base, Rodriguez's defense insisted on his innocence, pointing to the absence of direct witnesses to the murder and the possibility of alternative explanations for some of the evidence. They also prepared a number of witnesses ready to confirm the sergeant's good character and his inability to commit such a crime. By the start of the trial, both sides were ready to present their arguments, and the outcome of the case largely depended on how the jury would evaluate the presented evidence. After careful gathering of evidence and completion of the preliminary investigation, the Greenville County Prosecutor's Office decided to bring formal charges against Sergeant James Rodriguez. On July 28, 2019, 6 weeks after the discovery of Melissa Thompson's body, Rodriguez was charged with first-degree murder and sexual assault. The arrest procedure went without incident. Rodriguez, who had been under observation at the military base, was detained by military police and handed over to civilian authorities. The sergeant was taken to the Greenville County Jail, where he was officially registered and placed in a pre-trial detention cell. The next day, the first court hearing took place, where the charges were read to Rodriguez. The sergeant pleaded not guilty to all counts. His lawyer, Mark Steinberg, a well-known criminal defense attorney, told the press that his client completely denies involvement in the murder and is ready to prove his innocence in court. The county prosecutor, Sarah Johnson, made a brief statement, emphasizing the seriousness of the charges and expressing confidence in the strength of the evidence. She also noted that the prosecution would seek the maximum punishment if Rodriguez is found guilty. The judge set bail at $1 million, considering the gravity of the crime and the potential threat the accused might pose to society. Rodriguez was unable to post the required amount and remained in custody until the start of the trial. The military command of Fort Jackson issued an official statement expressing deep concern about the situation and assuring full cooperation with civilian authorities during the investigation. It was also announced that Rodriguez would be temporarily suspended from his duties until the completion of the trial. The arrest of a serviceman on charges of such a serious crime caused wide public resonance. Local media actively covered the development of events, and heated discussions unfolded on social networks. Many expressed shock that a person called to protect citizens was accused of brutal murder. Melissa Thompson's family made an emotional appeal, calling for a fair trial and expressing hope that the person guilty of their daughter's death would face deserved punishment. In preparation for the trial, Rodriguez's lawyer announced his intention to challenge a number of key pieces of evidence collected by the investigation, claiming that some of them were obtained in violation of procedural norms. This statement foreshadowed a tough battle in the courtroom. The prosecution, in turn, began preparing witnesses for the prosecution, including forensic experts, investigators, and acquaintances of both the victim and the accused. It was expected that the trial would become one of the most high-profile cases in the history of Greenville County. The trial of Sergeant James Rodriguez began on October 15, 2019, in the Greenville County Courthouse. The case attracted significant public and media attention, with the courtroom packed with journalists and spectators. The process opened with opening statements from both sides. Prosecutor Sarah Johnson presented the jury with a picture of a cold-blooded murder committed by a serviceman who had abused the victim's trust. She emphasized the presence of irrefutable evidence of Rodriguez's guilt. Defense attorney Mark Steinberg, in turn, portrayed Rodriguez as a devoted soldier and family man who had become a victim of circumstances and hasty conclusions by the investigation. He hinted at the possibility of alternative suspects whom the police allegedly did not properly consider. During the trial, the prosecution presented extensive evidence. Key elements were the results of DNA testing, geolocation data from Rodriguez's phone, and testimony from forensic experts. Special attention was paid to recovered messages from the victim's phone, indicating tense relations between her and the accused. The defense actively challenged the reliability of some evidence, particularly the testimony of the homeless witness and the interpretation of geolocation data. Steinberg also presented a number of witnesses, including Rodriguez's fellow soldiers, who characterized him as a reliable and balanced person. The culmination of the process was Rodriguez's own testimony. He admitted to having a relationship with Melissa but categorically denied involvement in her murder. The sergeant claimed that on the night of the crime, they did indeed meet, but parted peacefully, after which he returned home. The cross-examination of Rodriguez by Prosecutor Johnson was tense. She pointed out numerous inconsistencies in his testimony and demanded an explanation for the presence of the victim's phone in his home. Rodriguez appeared confused and stumbled in his answers several times, which did not go unnoticed by the jury. In closing arguments, the prosecutor summarized all the evidence, painting a picture of premeditated murder. The defense, on the contrary, insisted on the presumption of innocence and pointed to the absence of direct witnesses to the crime. After a 3-week trial, the case was handed over to the jury. The deliberation of the verdict took 2 full days, indicating the complexity of the decision-making process. After 2 days of intense deliberations, the jury reached a verdict. On November 8, 2019, in a packed courtroom, the jury foreman read the decision. James Rodriguez was found guilty on all counts, first-degree murder and sexual assault. The announcement of the verdict caused a tumultuous reaction in the courtroom. Melissa Thompson's family couldn't hold back tears of relief, while Rodriguez's wife burst into tears upon hearing the sentence. Rodriguez himself remained outwardly calm, only slightly lowering his head.